that we switch the presentations, and I would invite Pavel Pawlaczyk to start the afternoon session, and in the meantime we'll try to fix this issue. And just a matter of introduction, everyone who deals with peatland and wetland conservation and restoration knows Pavel Pawlaczyk. Personally, myself, if I have any issue in this regard, this is the first focal point to ask. So he has just one shortcoming here, that he is very busy all the time, and today we've got unique opportunity that we managed to like seize Pavel to our conference, and my suggestion is to everyone is to try to squeeze as much of him as possible. So Pavel, the floor is yours.
Okay, Słava, thank you for that presentation. I need to, oops, moment. Yeah, I think it is visible. Wetlands are biodiverse. It is nothing special. It is, for us, it is the evident truth. Wetlands are the home of variety of plants, animals. Wetlands are the home of the various habitats. But the value of the biodiversity itself is clear for us, but not clear for other people. That the important question is, has the biodiversity also the economic value? The answer is yes and no. Maybe the answer is yes, but the value is not always possible to recognize. No, because it is not easy to sell biodiversity. Yes, because at least there are at least some kinds of economical activities which are biodiversity based. If we consider the Soma National Park in Estonia, it is quite clear that the flooding period, so-called the fifth season of the year, is the period in which the very specific kind of tourism are possible, as the canoeing through the forest. If we look at the Biebrza marshes in Poland, the best attractor for the tourists are birds which are abundant in the Biebrza marshes, in particular in the spring periods. And if something goes wrong, and if some features of the wetlands are degraded, for example, if the Soma in Estonia are not flooded, local people are very unhappy because it has the immediate impact on their economical activity for the tourism. Similarly, in this year, in very dry spring, there was only a few birds in Biebrza, and it also impact the local economy. Sometimes the profits are far away from wetlands, but they still origin from wetlands. As the bird watching, crane watching in Germany, it is very popular in the northern Germany to observe the migrating crane. There are the boat cruises organized, the excursions organized. There are the specific places as the so-called kranorama built only for making possible for people to watch the feeding cranes in very comfort conditions. But of course, all that activities are clearly dependent on the cranes breeding on the various wetlands in the more eastern part of Europe. But sometimes the economic value of the wetlands is not only direct economical profits. Sometimes the economic value of the wetlands is in fact value of the ecosystem services, in particular regulatory services, as the peatlands, which in fact are the kind of sponge in the landscape. They impact the hydrological cycles. They impact the water circulation in the landscape. Without wetlands, will be more floods and more serious dry periods. And of course, we can prevent such hydrological disasters also without wetlands by some artificial measures. But the artificial measures costs. Then the economists can estimate the economic value of such ecosystem services, calculating the money which need to be spent for replacing that services, or asking people about their willingness to pay some money for achieving some service. That the peatlands or the natural river may be calculated as the economical values of the services which are provided. And there are, in literature, there are several concrete numbers. There are thousands of dollars or thousands for euros per hectare annually. But the problem is that such calculated economical value is only economical value. It's not the direct money. But of course, it is useful as the argument for politicians. For example, this is the draft of the Polish wetland strategy. And the clear arguments for politicians is the calculation that the cost of the implementation of that strategy is 7 billion euro. But the profits which wetland restoration can provide, the profits, it's mainly the economic value of the ecosystem services provided by the Polish wetlands, is 18.5 billion euro. It's much more than the costs. But it is useful for arguments for politicians, but there are some problems. First problem is who pays the cost and who profits. In most situations, this is not the same body and not the same person. On that picture, you can see the very unique situation. This is the Polish farmer. This is the Polish farmer who restore wetlands in their farm. Restore wetlands and stop the water outflow for their own benefits, for improving conditions for farming. And this is the situation, perfect situation, in which the same person pay the cost and the same person profits. But it is not very typical situation. In fact, in Poland, we have only one such farmers, and it is very exploited in media. It is presented on each conference like this one. We have no more such examples. The very typical and very usual situation is that the profits are the profits of the general society, but the costs must be paid by the particular landowner, which is the owner of the wetlands. And the question is how to transfer the general profits to that person who paid the costs. The second question is that the wetlands must be wet. As the pickled cucumbers, the wetlands must be still in the water. In the lack of water, both the cucumbers as the wetlands will degrade and will decompose. And the wetlands must be wet, which means that the wet conditions are not very suitable for at least some kinds of economical activity. There is the very strong limitation for the ways in which the landowner can use their land. If we imagine the space wet, dry, no use or intensive land use, the comfort zone for wetlands is, of course, the wet condition. Wetlands must not be used by human. It is okay if the wetlands are in natural state. They may be also used, but still they need to be wet. they are some specific situation in which the wetlands a bit drained, a bit more dry, they are still interesting from the point of view of biodiversity. This is the example of so-called semi-natural ecosystems, as for example, wet meadows, which are not the original wetlands, but are still very interesting and very useful for biodiversity as the butterflies or as the threatened species of birds. But from the point of view of landowner, the comfort zone of the use is to use the land. It may be dry, it may be wet, but it cannot be extremely wet. And the optimal zone for the land use and optimal zone for wetlands, in fact, has almost no common points. Sometimes a bit wet conditions are acceptable for the landowner, in particular if there is some financial incentive from public sphere. But still the common zone of the optimum for wetlands and optimum for the landowners is rather narrow. There are some points which are possible. For example, the wet meadow, which still are the meadow which are useful for a landowner, and they are important for biodiversity. This is semi-natural wetlands, a bit degraded wetlands, but still valuable from the natural point of view. If we pay incentive, the public incentive, and pay for the farmer, sometimes it is acceptable to have the semi-optimal condition from the point of land use and a bit more wet situation. It is the example of the meadow supported by the agri-environmental measures, for example. There is the zone for very specific economical activities, which are paludiculture, or maybe wider wetland culture, which means the very specific economical activities which are possible in very wet conditions, which are still in the optimal zone of wetlands, but they are definitely suboptimal from the point of view of land user. There are very specific as the production of typha, production of phragmites, or production of sphagna. There are rather on the margin of the typical economical activities. And the zone in which the wetlands still remain wetlands and the landowner is still happy from the possibility of economical use of his land exists, but it is very, very narrow. There are also the significant problems which are already presented by the Victor. The question, if we restore wetlands, will we indeed restore also wetland biodiversity? And the most common answer is no. If we restore degraded wetlands, we probably restore some biodiversity, but it will not be the same biodiversity as we lose from the original situation. If we restore wetlands, will we restore wetland ecosystem services? The most common answer is at least partly yes. We are much more successful in restoring wetland services than in restoring wetlands biodiversity. But we still must remember that the economical situation is still very tense. What about the situation in the background of changing climate? First of all, we need to accent that one of the ecosystem services of wetlands is the building resilience, building also resilience for climate change. If we live in wetland landscape, this landscape is probably much more resilient for the dry period. Evapotranspiration, transpiration from wetlands impact the microclimate. Probably the rains sometimes appears much more often than in the landscape without wetlands. Probably the natural river is much more resilient for the dry period and for limited flow than the river simplified and transformed by man. Because the riverbed is much more differentiated and all the river ecosystem components can find safe microhabitats even in the very limited flow. But in fact, what is much more important, which is the most important relation between wetlands and climate, is the relation between peatlands and climate. And this relation is also presented by the Victor in the introductory presentation. But let's remember, the most important is the carbon balance. Peatlands are the very specific ecosystem which can accumulate carbon. Generally, the peatlands can take the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and the sequestration of the carbon dioxide is much bigger than the carbon dioxide emitted from the respiration processes. This is not so easy because there are also other processes as the emission of methane, but the general balance is that the natural wetlands are ecosystems which can to sequestrate some carbon and decrease the number of carbon dioxide in atmosphere. And the numbers are also already presented. They are significant in the scale of our world. In fact, the processes and the system are a bit more complicated. There are a lot of unexpected elements, as, for example, the methane emission from the open water part of the wetlands, the methane emission from the open water in the ditches, also in the restored ditches, at others. But the general vision remains the same. The natural wetlands can sequestrate the carbon. The degraded wetlands became the carbon dioxide emitters. Generally, there is the problem of methane emission in case of wetland restoration and rewetting, but the complex analysis lead to the result of the simulation that if we need to mitigate the climate change, we need to use peatlands for that. And we need to restore and rewet peatlands as much as possible. If we analyze the long-term scenario, what we can do the best is to do it now, not wait next 50 years. Because if we wait 50 years, the impact of the degraded wetlands in the world scale which be worse than the results of rewetting wetlands immediately. It is the result of the balance between decreasing of carbon dioxide as a result of restoration and the methane peak as a result of wetlands rewetting. But how to do it and what funds can be used for doing this? Maybe we can use something as the emission trading system, which we use in the European Union, for example, for the limiting emission of greenhouse gases from the other kinds of economical activity. For example, if the factory need to produce something and emit the carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gases, they need to have so-called emission allowance unit. In fact, it means that it needs to buy the emission allowance unit on the market, and the price of unit is created on the market. In the last 10 years, the price of the allowance unit increase rapidly. The yesterday price was the 72 euros per ton of carbon dioxide equivalent. Maybe it would be good to use the similar system for the wetlands. And in the world, somewhere and sometimes there are some idea, for example, in the New Zealand. But it means that also the user of dry-net peatlands, which is fact is the peatland degrader and the greenhouse gas emitters, should also pay for the emission of greenhouse gases from the degraded peat. It would be the first system which follow the general polluter pay rule. But it means that, for example, the farmer which has in his farm the peat soils will be charged about €1,500 per hectare annually. And the question is, are we ready to charge our farmers for continuing the farming activity on the peat soils? The most common politician's answer is not definitely, we are not ready. It is that approach is not implementable in the real world. Therefore, we sometimes consider other solution. For example, the carbon credit market, which idea is not to pay the farmer for sequestrate carbon dioxide, not to pay farmer for public goods, but simply pay the farmers for degrade less, for emit less carbon dioxide. As the landowner decide to re-wet their lands, it will be followed by the reduction of the emission. For example, if the from the meadow on the dry-net peatlands, there is the emission of 20 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent annually. After re-wetting, it may be reduced to 10 tons. And this, maybe we can pay for this reduction of the emission. There are some bodies which wants to pay. They are companies which want to compensate their emission for achieving the zero emission image and are ready to pay to something other as the landowner to reduce their emission for the compensation of the emission of the company. This is the voluntary system, but also the market of such carbon credits can be developed. Why it is difficult in practice? It is difficult in practice because for such scheme and such market, we would like to declare what is exact value of the reduction of the emission for the particular landowner. And it is maybe impossible, maybe very difficult, because in fact, we can measure emission, but the detailed measurement emission is resource consuming and impact a wetland significantly. Even if we abandon the impact on the wetlands, the cost of the equipment necessary to precise estimation of the emission is much bigger than the value of the carbon credits, which may be developed in such situation. We can use the more simplified methods as some proxies, as use the land use as a proxy. It is in fact the base of the very simple scheme in the IPPC guidelines for reporting national emission, or a bit more detailed, so-called the GEST scheme based on the vegetation unit. We can map the vegetation unit and calculate what is the expected emission and what is the change of the expected emission. The problem is such methods are usually based on some assumptions which are not very safe and not well confirmed. And the problem is that if we use the classification approach, as the guest, as the IPPC scheme, we can certify the change between the central points of the class, but the real change may be much less or much bigger than the change which we can certify. For example, if we have as a start point the almost dry but almost fresh meadow, and we only change the situation only a little, and change the situation to the fresh but near the border with the dry meadow, the small change would be certified as the change between middle of the classes. It is not fair. In other situation, much bigger change will get the same certification. The problems are difficult, but in fact, despite some doubts and problems, such schemes of carbon credit certification schemes are developed over the world. For example, in Germany, we have the More Futures system. We have the Peatlands Code in the UK and other such systems across all the world. Generally, we can impress the wetlands ecosystem services in monetary terms. We can say that 1 hectare of natural wet peatlands provide the services of water retention. The average calculation is about 300 euro. The carbon sequestration, the real carbon sequestration, it is 190 euro per hectare. It means the total profit is the 500 euro from the hectare of the wetlands, from the natural wetlands. Maybe even if we have degraded wetlands, we can restore the wetlands and restore also the profits. But the 1 hectare of dry peatlands is a cost of greenhouse gases emission about 600 euro per hectare annually. This vision is important as the argument for wetland restoration we can use in particular for politicians and for the general society. But we need still to remember that it is only the theoretical calculation. The values has the scientific background, and the calculation is important part of the general economy, including the environmental aspect. But it is only theory, and in practice, there is the main problem that we cannot transfer that economical balance into the real funds flow. How to do it and how to provide the real flow of funds for wetland restoration, this is still open question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Pavel. And please, your questions, maybe from panelists first, since I don't see any questions texted on the chat. Jarek, please.
Pavel, can you show the previous slide? I mean, the foremost, the przedostatni slide of your presentation, because I think we should add something to this.
Maybe. This one.
No.
The previous one.
The previous one, yes, 24th.
24th is this,
Yeah,
this one.
yeah.
This one, yes, exactly. Because we estimate the economic value of peatland due with water retention and carbon sequestration. So totally okay, but you not added here the value of biodiversity. of course, it's very difficult to assess, but we, of course, for to have a full picture, we should in some way add at least, without even the value, but we should add biodiversity, which sometimes were monetarized. Slava can probably provide some examples, but yes, exactly, plus biodiversity. And it will, of course, rise the price. We don't know how much, but anyway, it will rise. It's
Jarek,
my proposal.
Jarek,
Yeah.
okay, you are right, but the crucial is that we don't know how much.
Yes, yeah,
Because
I fully agree.
concerning water retention, we have some background. We
Yeah.
can calculate the value of water retention, taking the average retention effect of the wetlands in particular catchment, and calculate the economical impact as the replacement costs, as the money which need to be spent for replacing this effect. Yeah, we can calculate the carbon sequestration using the for comparison the price of the allowance unit of the ton of carbon dioxide equivalent on the European Union market for the factories and other economic activities, ETC system, and taking the assumption that the natural wetlands sequestrate 2 tons of carbon dioxide equivalents annually, and we can propose some concrete figure. But I cannot imagine how to calculate the average value of the biodiversity of the wetland.
Well,
fully agree. It is why for political discussion, we should add the total 520 plus biodiversity. But maybe Victor has some idea.
well, before Victor will ask his question, I would like to clarify one moment here. You meant carbon sequestration as a proper sequestration, as a peat generation process, or also emission reduction if we
No, sequestration is sequestration.
So you do not calculate the emission reduction if we
No,
rewet.
Emission reduction is only reduction. It's not the value itself. Yeah, I compare the real sequestration on the natural bog and as the minus as the loss, the emission for dry net peatlands. Yeah, so, the reduction of the emission is the sometimes after the partial rewetting, the negative impact may be decreased. It may be not minus 600, but minus 200, for example, but still minus.
So all the time you are talking about the intact peatland here in this case on this slide, or is it a rewetted peatland?
Maybe it's not the perfect slide because it's concerned the history of this particular peatland. It is the Zieleń Miastecki. It is rather intact peatlands, but it is the rather soligenic peatlands in the forested landscape. It's probably not so easy because it may be some effect of the catchment.
I see. All right. So Victor, please, your question.
I want to take part in the discussion whether and how to estimate the value of biodiversity. And that will actually apply to other things like carbon sequestration, water retention, etc. These ecosystem services, including biodiversity, are worth as much as people want to pay for it. And what all this talking about calculations is calculating non-market value, and you get very contrastful results depending on the method. But at the end, if someone wants to pay a lot for restoration projects, then its results are worth as much as people paid for it. So I think we need to, it will be regulated at the end by the supply and demand if we talk about market values. So we need to give the buyers good stories. yes, to be very convincing and explain how precious this biodiversity is. And then it may be sold on a very high price to pay for a little restoration project. It can be sold cheaper if we are able to deliver it cheaper and etc. But I think we should not be so constrained. And I understood it actually recently on calculating the value. We should be more focused on selling the reliable story and proving that we can really deliver the benefits, that there is no greenwashing. And if it is science-based, then the price will settle up eventually by the market. Yeah, that's what I think.
Thank you, Victor. And
Generally, I agree. Also, which I'm presenting here, and also the numbers, it is in fact the story. It is in fact the story which we try to sell for the politicians. It is far away for paying real money.
Well, and I would like to add to what Victor told that there are in environmental economics there are science-based methods which allow eliciting the value of biodiversity. Those methods are not free from from controversy, and they are disputable, but they still exist. And you are quite right, Victor, telling that the thing is basic in economics. Things basically are worth that much that people are willing to pay for them. And it works both on the project level when we're talking with someone, some individual investor or someone who is willing to pay, and also on the political level when we're talking about public preferences. And if the people, if the citizens of the given country are willing to pay such and such for restoration of the given peatland, it means that its biodiversity is worth this sum, and this is not free from problems, and this is difficult, but it's still doable. And I think that the next presentation possibly will assure of this. But are there any Kaisu?
Yeah, I'd like to maybe turn the setup a little bit and bring in this view that also if you're able to get funding for your peatland restoration, that's an economic benefit for your area as well. And if it's a big scale funding, that often then if you're involved with other restoration practitioners or programs, let's say in Europe or even connected globally, that will then attract wider interest in your area. And that's an indirect economic benefit of nature restoration or peatland restoration. And then that can also be for local governance an important point when you can employ local contractors, machines, and the flow will be into the communities and to the local level. But then you really have to show transparency. If you get a big funding and you go demonstrating that things will happen, then you really have to take that to the grassroots level and show real action on the ground. But I also see that as a big economic benefit, more indirect than as the carbon markets. But I think it really is an actual real thing.
Thank you for this. Fully agree.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, so I had one more question to Paweł actually. So I can see him. I'm not sure if he can still hear me. So,
yes.
From your presentation, I got that you are very interested in those carbon markets. And what about water markets? because you also talked about biodiversity credit, but water markets were not much discussed in this presentation, whereas you had this water retention value.
It is interesting question, but I know nothing about real example of water markets.
Okay, so it's happening now in some of the more southern countries, such as Spain, France, and Italy, and they are starting to introduce water markets. So actually putting a price on water that is retained or not used by farmers. So it's a big issue in those countries, and I guess we could kind of borrow those values from them to learn about the future scenarios for Poland as well. So to put like a higher price on water than we currently have. So it's that might be an interesting condition to some of the arguments that you make as well.
Yeah, but my first impression is, sorry, I see a lot of problems. How to calculate the water, because the water in the dry period is much more valuable in the water during the rain. Yeah. And in fact, the wetlands don't provide the more water.
Yeah.
The wetlands rather switch the water which is available during the rain to the water which is available during the dry period. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the markets must be based on the price difference in the different periods of the year, and must be based on that switch. Yeah. And the problem is also that it is even more difficult to calculate the effect of the real wetlands than the carbon effect. And the problem is that, at least in Poland, for most of the water user, they use the rainwater which is accumulated in the soil, which is in fact quite different than the water which is included to the hydrological cycles of the water courses, and which is calculated as the water resources of the Poland, for example.
Yeah, but we are talking about farmers a lot, right? So like farmers are draining those regions that are water rich. And why they are doing so? Like if they could save water and therefore kind of not kind of get the benefits from retaining the waters from other farmers who are overusing it in the region. So we didn't make like a European kind of market, but like a local market for this, right?
Kasia, but in Poland, most of farmers work on the water, which is the water from the rain, which drop to the field, and the water is in the soil on the field, and there is no possibility to storage this water or to transfer that water to other farmers.
Yeah,
the water is used by the plants exactly in the place when it drops from the sky. Yeah, there is also the second system, which is the water in the water courses, which can be stored, but in fact cannot be used for the irrigation of that fields, because we generally have not the irrigation systems.
Yeah, but I see it like as two different types of market. So for example, in those regions where they don't have, where they use just the water from rain, then it's about the drought, right? Because they get a lot of insurance from the drought, and therefore it's more about the costs or like savings coming from not using that much water, right? And then there is a very different ecosystem and kind of water usage problem in those regions that represent wetlands, right? So water has value for farmland everywhere. Just in some regions, it will be different sources, and some regions will be more kind of influenced by the severity of drought and lack of water than others, right? Even within the Poland, we will have a lot of differentiation between those regions. And what
generally, yes, of course, I fully agree with the idea, but I see a lot of problems for calculating the value.
With the implementation and enforcement. and let's move on. So, as you know, the matter of conservation and restoration of peatlands requires cooperation with many stakeholders, and the cooperation with some of them is far from easy. And one of those groups are farmers. So today I'm more than happy to introduce my colleague, Dr. Katarzyna Zagórska. We both work for the Warsaw Ecological Economics Center, and Katarzyna is the deputy director to this center. And today she will present about actually the issue will rewarding farmers for providing public goods help wetland restoration. And Kasia, the floor is yours.
So for some time, I've been working with Ola and Slava on the problem of how we should reward farmers for providing public goods. And one of the issues that we are particularly interested in is wetland restoration and whether it is possible to provide such an economic support system to enhance the provision of public goods by those regions. And well, farming is quite particular type of activity. First of all, it's a business kind of approach. So farmers live on a profit. So they do those managerial decisions based on their economic well-being. But on the other hand, it provides a lot of public goods, including food security, water security, water quality, and it affects all kinds of ecosystem services. So it creates a lot of problems and also tensions between the budget spending, which shouldn't be too profitable for farmers, but on the other hand, the fact that we somehow want to safeguard the profits of farmers and allow them for provision of those goods. So as Slava said, I'm an economist by education, but also I work at the Center for Ecological Economics in Warsaw. And well, usually people could say that economics doesn't have to do much to do with environmental protection, but we kind of try to make cases because we know that environmental policies are costly, and that's easy to calculate, but how valuable or how beneficial they are, that's much more difficult to account for. Therefore, we try to express both the costs and benefits in monitoring measures, and that's quite a difficult methodological task to do. It takes years to learn how to do this, and in case of applying it to farming, it becomes even more complex than usual, because one needs to understand this whole system of monetary flows. And it was already said that much of the degraded wetlands in Poland are used for agriculture, especially peatlands. They are used for agriculture, and it's because they provide quite high profit. They are water rich, and they are nutrient rich. So it's very tempting for farmers to use such land for farming and for actually like active agricultural use of those lands. When on the other hand, what we all know is that we need to protect this land. So how to do this, how to set the levels of payments that we can propose to farmers. Well, when I look at this map of Europe in terms of current drought situation, I not only see the risk from the kind of individual perspective, but which means higher costs of food, for example, but also I see it from the insurance perspective. So we economists think about in terms of money, and farmers for quite some years now received financial support from the government that covers the insurance from the drought. And therefore, I see this rewetting of peatlands to kind of affect the levels of risk when it comes to flooding, when it comes to drought, and other ecosystem services, but I will mostly consider water in what I discussed now. So when we have a drought, we can have also wildfires, and we can calculate the losses that are caused by such scenarios, and we can compare it with a scenario where we didn't encounter such losses. So Wiebrza National Park was already discussed here, and it's very much like in experts' opinions, it's very much stressed that it's important to develop such subsidy system that are attractive for farmers, because otherwise they will be kind of on the other, they will be on the having their own arguments for draining those regions, and that somehow we need to calculate it better, because what we have now in the policy doesn't work properly and doesn't support the ecosystems that we have in that are already kind of touched by the agriculture, but they are becoming more and more severely affected. Okay, so there is a couple of issues with agriculture and water. So first of all, it was found in a large-scale review that technology won't save water. So agricultural technology doesn't save water. It actually helps to kind of relocate part of the resources. So so when we improve irrigation technology, it wouldn't cause water saving. So depending obviously on the different water system, but still the effects are not large. And when an economist think about such environmental problems as wetland conservation, we first want to make sure that the policies that we consider are supported by environmental modeling. So there needs to be a solution in place in terms of conservation or restoration, and we need to understand that what we propose will actually influence positively on the environment before we even consider the costs and benefits, because we don't want to propose something that will be counterproductive. And yeah, and there are those simple solutions that exist, such as stopping the draining of wetlands, or stop banning building new ditches that are introduced in some regions, especially national parks. Also, the OTOP is involved in a couple of such initiatives, so they already understand the costs of such investments. But a big issue is also the ownership of the land and the neighboring lands. So mainly those initiatives are now introduced in national parks. In Norway, the results are published in a very recent study by Stachowicz et al. 2025. And you can see how introduction of such blockages in ditches actually had quite impressive results on the agricultural land. But when we discussed with them, it's actually not that the land is owned by the farmers, but it's rented to farmers. So actually there was another the governments could decide to introduce this policy on this land. And in terms of Poland, it would probably be more individual negotiations, and that's quite complex to do. So in Poland, currently we have two types of policies to protect wetlands in agriculture. There is obviously the strategy that was proposed in 2021, I suppose, for the coming decade. It's currently not in place, but it gives a lot of reasonable solutions that we face, but there is some resistance in terms of policy making to introduce those. Still, there are two tools that are being one that is already existing, which is called eco-schemes, and this is an European Commission-funded program for water retention on permanent grassland. And from next year, there should be also a new standard for good agricultural and environmental conditions introduced, called GAEC. And this standard will cover 400,000 hectares. At least that's the goal of this program, although we are not sure how it will be monitored and whether it will actually be effective. Still, as you can see, there is huge difference between the area of peatland that was stated on the first slide, which is 900,000 hectares, and the area that will be covered with this good standard, and that comes from some of the assumptions of the program. So this is to be assessed in the coming years, but for now I will focus on eco-schemes, and there is something that we noticed together with Ola and Slava, that there is very low interest in this water retention program by farmers. And in this table, you can see that there is an area for which farmers enrolled over the last 3 years. And also that there is a target area on the right-hand side. And giving a very brief summary of what happened is that those payments were so low that they didn't even fulfill the 50% of the target area. So there is very, very, very low interest coming from farmers in this type of scheme. And why, as an economist, we suspect it is? We suspect that the level of payments is just too low. So we naturally ask a question about how is it calculated and is it calculated properly, right? So the current level of payments is around a little less than 60 euro per hectare per year, which is quite small amount of money. So what's the economics behind it? So we actually asked the Institute of Agriculture and Food Economics, and what we got to know is that the payment rate is estimated as the loss of benefits and additional costs on the side of farmers associated with this eco scheme, and that it's a balance between the flooding of the harvest, balance between the value lost of harvest due to flooding of those grassland and the limited costs from mowing the meadows. And that's the difference between the costs and the benefits that the farmers get from these specific hectares. And that's actually kind of the lowest level of payment that can be proposed, because the European Union also it meets the formal requirements, so it's all cost forgone. But also the European Union allows for compensation for some additional benefits. So if they wanted, they could additionally take into their account the economic value of ecosystem services offered, which is something that that also Pavel presented. So they could add like a little margin for some or even a big margin for the economic services that are provided by specific regions. And the economics of the problem is mostly about cost efficiency. There is a very nice OECD report which considered agri-environmental payments mostly. And what they see as not cost efficient is overcompensation to each production unit. By production unit, we mean one farm that has low cost of compliance and low environmental benefits. So there are two conditions for the for the schemes to be inefficient. One is that some farms can have very low costs of performing such activities if they have very low costs. For example, they don't have to do nothing, then they will just accept the money, but actually there will be no active engagement with the land. And others are those that will provide very low environmental benefits. So obviously there's large variation in terms of how much even water retention one field can provide compared with another. And those are this kind of assessment is conducted by environmental scientists. So you probably know which parcels of land are the most valuable ones compared with other parts where it wouldn't be so beneficial for the environment. So what they note is that this type of uniform practice-based payment, which is that most common approach to making payments to farmers. Uniform means one level of payment for all, and practice-based means that you just give recommendations about what people are supposed to do, and if they do this, you pay them. And they notice that it ignores the fact that there is a large variation between farmers, both in terms of the cost of performing such action, but also in terms of benefits that they provide. So I selected a couple of points that they note. First of all, that it's very budget efficient to target such payments. So if we want to do this type of spending, we should target specific farms or specific landscape level units. So like a combination of farms that are nearby, especially for biodiversity. It matters that it's like a larger, there are those connections between different larger farms, not like a separate small parcels. And that would be very beneficial in terms of money if we are able to reach such collective, rather targeted solution. And also that those types of payments should be adjusted to different conditions that farmers face. So there should be kind of tailored to different conditions and not same in all different regions. And what they propose is a result-based payment. So payment by results rather than by practices, which means that at farm level, it's initially measured what is the level of ecosystem services provided, and then what is the improvement in those conditions. And that's made on local level. So, so there is like a picture of whether or not we at least managed to conserve or even improve the environmental conditions. And for that, there is very high potential, especially when it comes to hybrid payments. Hybrid payment means that basic costs are covered, but then if somebody has extra results, so better environmental results, he's paid extra. So that's the hybrid payment. And that's very, very safe for farmers. So thinking in terms of economics, we can kind of zoom in into the perspective of one farmer. And one farmer will accept a contract if the level of subsidy offered, or level of payment, is higher than his willingness to accept. And in economics, we often talk about willingness to pay and willingness to accept. Willingness to accept is the average minimum amount of payment that a farmer is willing to accept in order to perform a specific action. So, for example, for most of the farmers, it appeared that those 300 zloty per hectare a year, it was too little. So it was less than their willingness to accept to enroll into this specific contract. And obviously this level of willingness to accept, it's a private information by which only farmers know. It can be revealed with economic experiments. So we have different experimental protocols to ask farmers about it, such as auctions or surveying experiments. And we try to write it in a way that we reveal true values, because we know that participation of farmers is truly voluntary. So if we observe low level of enrollment, such as in case of those eco schemes for water retention, then we can be quite sure that there was not much interest due to the fact that the level of payments is too low. And obviously, on the other hand, we don't want to propose too high subsidies, because if those subsidies are very, very high, then it means that farmers make a lot of profit. And that brings us to the bigger picture. So from my experience, farmers are excellent experts on their land. They know how much money they will lose or gain from different types of proposals or contracts. So once you ask farmer, there will be definitely a value at which he will tell you that he could agree to perform such action. He will just present you with those calculations and tell you how much it is worth for him to, for example, flood a meadow on a given year. And the bigger picture, so if we zoom out and look at the whole country, then we have social benefits, opposite way. So social benefits, the willingness to pay, or the type of saving, economic saving that we make on providing different ecosystem services. Whereas social costs are the costs that the society, that the part of the government's budget that goes into a specific policy. So here the social cost would be a sum of payments made to farmers, whereas the benefit is the value of ecosystem services provided by those farmers. And if we calculate such difference between farmers' lowest level of willingness to accept and society level of willingness to pay for it, and if there is a margin, so the difference between benefits and costs, then we can say that actually there could be some point in between that is an attractive policy from the government. Farmers would still be attracted to do this, but on the other way, society as a whole would also benefit from it, because the benefits would outweigh the costs of such policy. And as economists, we also have our tools to reveal the value of social benefits, which is not always so easy, because we don't have market for it. There are different types of databases for that. I also included one here because I think that's the best one for Europe for now. Okay, and to connect this type of benefit analysis, I wanted to give you this example by Stachowicz and al. From 3 years ago, where they calculated the benefits and costs of rewetting peatlands in the area of Neman River Basin. So I stressed here that they have some specific approach to calculating benefits, as well as to calculate the costs of this action. So let's try to understand what they do here. So first of all, if somebody wants to conduct this case or this type of evaluation, he needs to select optimal area for returning such near nature conditions. So it's not just any area, it's the specific area that you as environmental scientists are interested in introducing those policies. So it should be all country level, but rather some specific points on a map where it could be very beneficial. What to do next? So next they calculate the water retention potential So what is the volume of water that that this region could retain, and then they inform how much meters in total it could be, it could support. Then they take a market value, so they take market value of building retention units, and with the specific water storage, they recalculate it into gains. So they inform how much it would be worth in terms of water retention to have water storage within those within this region. And these they compare with costs, and by costs I think they mostly say about investment costs, but not about other costs, such as, for example, maybe some parts of the land would be needed to bought from farmers. So for example, if we assume that's voluntary, then it could be much higher than actually like buying the land, or that could be also very costly to buy the land, right? So anyway, for now, the agri-environmental policy works on voluntary basis. So you need to account for, at the level of cost, you need to account also for farmers' willingness to accept. Okay, and this study was actually later used in many different projects, such as Servipit projects. So this value that they stated here was replicated through other projects, and is kind of continuing as a basic baseline level for Poland. And in other regions, they do more comprehensive evaluations of this type of land. So, for example, I gave here Nevo UK, which is like a governmental portal, also provided with some scientific inputs from Leeds University. And what they have there is that you can have a big map. On this map, you can select different land units. You click on this land unit, and you can learn about, you can get quantitative data on the valuation of different ecosystem services. And that's one of the best example of that kind of valuation. So in the UK, I think it was mentioned today that they are introducing new types of policies in agriculture to protect nature. So in UK, they have very good basis to say how much land changes are worth in terms of money in different regions. So basically, they have all the information to propose such policies, which is something that we are still missing here in Poland. And together with Ola and Slava, we are kind of trying to put some additional calculations for Poland to simulate similar values for wetlands in Poland. So we just started a study which uses benefit transfer method. And benefit transfer is when you take some units of land from different studies. For example, we could take some wetlands from UK, and then we try to find similar land units in Poland and transfer the value between the two regions, but adjusting it for some socioeconomic and regional characteristics to learn about the value for the society of different services that are offered. But this is still a work in progress, so we are trying to start with the basic map of wetlands in Poland, then to calculate how much water retention potential it has, and to put a value on this. And it's still ongoing, but we hope that the final results will support the agri-environmental policy with information about how much space there is between the level of payment offered now for water retention up to the level of the social benefits. So how much more money could be offered to farmers to be still socially beneficial for the society. And we hope that it will make case about how the benefits are higher than the cost of introducing such policies and why it's still beneficial to offer farmers the money, and assess different policy scenarios of that type, which we hope that will also show that this type of conservation and restoration can be considered an investment over time. And I really enjoyed that in some of the presentation, there were those selling points for protection of wetlands. So for example, when Professor Kotowski told about war protection, well, public defense, the defense and war defense is a classic example of public good. So the benefits can be calculated of such program. It can be weighted against other types of military spending and assessed based on that. So it gives like maybe it's not the most natural way of talking about wetlands, but it gives economic arguments that can be used as a nugget kind of approach to kind of sell it to policymaker that we want to protect those regions and this specific because they offer this kind of services. And that's kind of the language of benefits that we want to use. Also, Pavel told about recreation benefits and bird watching. And it's very common that once farmers notice that they benefit from protecting such land in terms of tourism and recreation, they will start to protect it. But this is a process of kind of changing the incentives from destroying it to conserving it. We still need better data in terms of economic valuation. And by this, I don't mean benefit transfer, but more like primary studies that would allow us to say how much different ecosystem services are worth for the society in Poland. They are still too little known for us, and it's not always easy to compare between countries. And what we hope to do together is to separate those values for agricultural land. So the value that of water retention specifically, but also prevention of flood losses, drought or wildfire losses, and all types of savings in terms of insurance payouts. I think that is and will be a big topic in the coming years, both in farming and other types of another populations, also the general population. So I think there's something to talk about in terms of economic benefits. And yeah, I think what needs recognition is also that it's not only the cost of investment made, but also the cost of sustaining and keeping this policy in place over time, over a long period of time, and monitoring those results and seeing whether the money is spent well or not, because it's all about the process of piloting, experimenting, seeing where is the optimal value and adjusting it a little bit each year just to find some balance between budget spending and the benefits that are provided. Okay, and that's about it. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Kasia, for your very impressive and thorough presentation of the topic. And well, your questions are welcome. We're running a little bit late on time, but we can afford a couple of questions at least. Seems like there are no questions.
Maybe they will come later.
Yeah,
So.
perhaps they will come later. So we encourage you to ask your questions, including via emails, and we are open for the contact and for the feedback from your part.
Yeah, and I'm very curious of the last presentation as well, because I think it touches very similar topics of farmers and
yeah, absolutely.
payments.
So if there are no questions at all, we can proceed, I think. Kasia also mentioned some mapping issues, and we'll be talking about maps here and more specifically about Web Atlas. So Tina will tell us about one of the project activities which have been implemented. I mean the peatland restoration Web Atlas. Tina, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Slava. Thank you. So my name is Tiina Oinonen, and I work for Snow Change Cooperative as a monitoring specialist of peatlands. And in this project, which is funded by Nordic Council of Ministers, this project with OTOP and UNCG, I have been developing this Web Atlas with Programming Office Nollventure here in Finland. And in this presentation, I will give a short introduction about what the Web Atlas is and what were the aims and purposes of developing the Web Atlas. And next slide, please. Okay, so our aim was to create a digital platform where to showcase a wide range of peatland conservation and restoration action, which are carried out by the project partners. And we wanted to gather these actions together and visualize it in this kind of accessible interface where we can provide a clear and comprehensive picture of ongoing efforts and methods and some site-specific goals.
Wyciszyłem, jeszcze trwa ta konferencja, ale mogę.
Victor, you are heard.
And this allows us to demonstrate the scale of and diversity of the sites. And another important goal is to facilitate the knowledge sharing between partners. And Web Atlas can serve as a centralized platform where experiences and best practices are easily accessible. And this enables learning from each other and identify some shared problems. And we are also aiming to increase the public visibility by making these sites and the conservation efforts visible through this interactive and user-friendly interface. And we are hoping to reach a broader audience like local communities, decision makers, funders, researchers, and general public. Next slide. So one of our goals is to build an understanding of different kinds of pressures that peatlands are facing across Europe. And these pressures vary significantly by country, ranging from drainage for agriculture or forestry to peat extraction, drought, other land use change, not to mention the pressure that Ukraine is facing right now. And by visualizing this data in shared platform, we can help to identify common challenges and regional differences, which is essential for designing targeted and effective conservation strategies. And this Web Atlas also functions as a tool for project results, if it's monitoring data or restoration progress or some site-specific information. Presenting this in a map-based interface make it easier to share insight with stakeholders and funders and general public. And that sharing successful restoration practices can highlight concrete examples of what has worked in different contexts or perspective and support evidence-based approach. Next slide. So here you can see the Web Atlas map, and currently we have 10 sites from Ukraine and 6 sites from Poland located in the map with introductions, and some site-specific information will be updated soon and constantly. And this interactive map visualizes perfectly the ecological corridor that these OTOP and UNCG peatlands are creating across the Eastern Europe. Next slide. And in Finland, we have currently 158 sites, which are rewilding or restoration sites. Some are owned by Snow Change and some are only managed by Snow Change. And these sites extend the corridor to the boreal and subarctic zone. And one good example of is that natural and restored peatlands provide breeding habitats for species such as bean goose and golden plover and ruff, which they rely on the wetlands in Poland and Ukraine as critical stopover sites during the migration. And next slide. So, this is one way how we can display the site-specific information of the sites. And I am now not going exactly details of this site, but I want to show you what are the possibilities how to display these restoration sites. So we can display or in the historical context. And next. And about the connections to the, for example, connectivity to the other nature reserves in the area. And next. And what are the characteristics of this special site? Is it special habitat type or topography? And next. And what are the problems and threats of this site? And so what kind of pressure it is facing? And next. And specific species data about plants or birds or mammals. And next. And then how these sites are monitored, and where to find more information, and probably how to take part in the monitoring project. And next. And then we can display how the restoration or conservation action, the timeline continues. So this is just one example how to showcase the sites. And next slide. So in summary, by supporting the open exchange of knowledge and experience among countries and projects, it promotes the implementation of the best practice in peatland restoration and increase understanding of the various pressures the peatlands are facing across Europe. And in addition, it increases the public visibility of the partners' sites and raises awareness of these multiple values these peatlands can provide. And in this case, it might also help with the engagements of the stakeholders or, for example, the landowners. And next. So thank you. Sorry about the technical problems. I'm pleased to answer if you have now any questions. And please visit peatlandrestorationatlas.org and share it also for your contacts. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Tina, for this perfect presentation. And I deeply apologize for the technical issues. This is nobody's fault but mine. And sorry for that. Should you have any questions, it's the highest time to ask them to Tina.
At least for me, it has been really inspiring to learn about the Polish and Ukrainian cases. Those are quite different than we have in Finland. So I have learned a lot when reading your site cases.
And I must say from our part that the person who is in charge of this atlas on our part, Magda, is full of excitement about the opportunities this wonderful tool gives, and we strongly encourage all the partners and all the colleagues to think about and consider joining this atlas as well.
Yes, congratulations for doing this. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. And are there any remarks and questions or questions to Tina? If not, we have came up to the last point of the last presentation for today, and it will be the presentation by another UNCG colleague, Petro. Petro, are you with us?
Доброго дня. Так, скажіть, будь ласка, чи
Right, good afternoon. Can you please tell whether you can hear my interpretation?
Share your screen, and for those who wants to listen the presentation in English, you should switch to the English channel in interpretation. Because the presentation will be delivered in Ukrainian with English slides.
Так, одну секундочку.
Right, just give me 1 sec.
Доброго всім дня. Після таких
So,
глибоких
good afternoon, everyone. After those deep scientific presentations of Polish colleagues and the deep practical presentations of Finland colleagues, my presentation will seem a little bit quite controversial and discussional. At some point, maybe a little bit angry, but the situation when it comes to the nature preservation in Ukraine and the whole world is far from its best. That's why it seems to me that this kind of things can provoke some kind of discussions in this situation. And a couple of words, since it has already been said by the colleagues when they recalled about the possible after-war recovery, that there will be a pressure on nature territories, but it is already there. And in addition to the direct consequences of war Alexei told about, even now we can feel the indirect consequences of Russian aggression. Because in order to compensate the losses that energy sector, agricultural sector, and other sectors and businesses have had. As a matter of fact, right now they are moving to the territories that, so to say, in brackets, are safe, because in Ukraine there is no safe territory right now because of the constant bombardment by drones, Shaheds, and so on. But they are moving to that territories, and we already have facts that some locations, including wetlands, peatlands, that in the past were not used, for the last couple of years, they return into usage. And literally one example for you to understand why this is already a problem is what Catherine told about. A big manufacturer of potato moved from Kherson region, from the one occupied left bank, to Zhytomyr region. And what did they do? The territory and melioration system that hasn't been used for more than 20 years, they cleared the channels out and made the additional drying out. They built the dams on these channels. Why? In order to use the water for the melioration. And so to say, they increased the water intake from the rivers around. And all this was supported by USAID project. And this all is being lobbied as a successful story. Yes, it's a successful story for the business. The business is relocated, it managed to recover, bring taxes to create the workplaces, but for the nature, that's a catastrophe. The territory that used to be more or less preserved turned into simply agricultural desert. That's literally a couple of pictures from that successful story. And when we tell about nature preservation in Ukraine, I think that one should still articulate some kind of peculiarities that at some point are similar with other countries and at some point are different from other countries. And first, what is important to say is that a big part of our territory, including the peatlands, they still belong to the state or to the local communities, so to say, the analog of Polish gmina. So why is this important? Because these are not the territories of forests that in Poland are also in state property, but are the land of the agricultural purpose, meaning that we don't have precise numbers, but we can state that approximately 20% of the agricultural lands are communal land, meaning that if we include it, it's gonna be 7 or 8 millions of hectares of agricultural, meaning that these are in communal property, meaning that one has to look for another approaches here. What is also important is that still in Ukraine, there is too many land that is not used in the economy activity. It's not a benefit of Ukraine. It's a consequence that after the breakdown of Soviet Union, the inefficient territories that back at the time during the first years of Ukrainian independence were not useful to use, they simply became to grow with bushes. But this amount of territories is big. Second one, it is important that we still have a good preserved territories that do not have official status of the nature preservation area or Natura 2000, meaning that they are under the threat of usage. Another important moment, and I will also be showing examples, that truth be told, Ukrainian ecology legislation is pretty strict. We have such limitations that, so to say, that are more robust than some of the European Union countries. But at the same time, this legislation doesn't have the proper control, and this leads to law disobeying. And disobeying not by a human being, but not by a business with official documents, so to say, to extract the peat or other minerals without some kind of proper procedures. Another important moment is when we talk about communications, that the majority of our documents, that both these kind of legislations, strategies, memorandums, they remain only on paper, meaning that if one reads our strategies, Ukrainian strategies, all of them, that all the peatlands should be preserved, recovered, and so on. But the reality is on the contrary. That's another example for you. That's between Ukraine and Poland. And you can see that this is Lviv area. I especially chose this one. And you can see that the unused land are not only there as a borderline, but also there are a little bit further away where there is no limitation in usage. And a big amount of land that doesn't have any kind of status, they don't have any nature preservation status, no used in the agriculture. That's such a peculiarity one has to take into account. And this land, in its majority, will be in communal usage that is not used. This is a picture. Unfortunately, it is already like this, but on a much slower scale. But that's how the some minerals can be extracted from the land. And that's another screenshot from other system of the purchase of agricultural land. And this territory is covered by vegetation. Yes, it's not available from the point of view of biodiversity, but any territory is much more valuable than the territory used in the agriculture, and officially sold in for the small amount of money, 3.5 hryvnias. That's the annual rent for a hectare of this land. This one is strictness of our legislation. There is an article about the small rivers protection. If one reads this article, it looks like that there, as a water intake and the flood plains, nobody can do anything. No one can dig it out. Everyone should preserve the vegetation. Everyone should preserve the meanders and so on. But if one takes a look at from practical reality, it's not used. It's dead, and the article is dead, and only a couple of judges use this article. Next one is a photo from our expedition. That's one of the river beginnings. Again, at this very one, you can see that there is a small spring coming in here. That, as a matter of fact, there's a sign why this article of the legislation does not work. Another important moment that is not accepted to say so widely, especially at those events, of the high-level events. But there is a factor right now, both in Ukraine, that local communities that, as a result of decentralization, have received a big amount of land and other natural resources. They are not interested in preservation and storage of nature, because the easiest way is simply how to receive a money in the community budget. They have communal money, they can give it to rent to agriculture and receive money into the budget, or to give out the allowance for digging out the rare earths. And that's basically money into the budget. And I clearly understand that somewhere in the perfect world scenario in the future, there will be done ecological education, communities will become conscious, Ukrainian budget will be able to allocate proper money to compensate for all this. Next one, the subsidies from EU will work in the format of the joint common agricultural policy and responsible projects. Yes, maybe it's gonna be there in 5, 10, 20 years, but until then, we will lose these territories, this nature that we have, and later on, we will simply have to recover them. As a matter of fact, we will be doing all those mistakes, all those problem paths that the, say, Baltic states have gone through. They had the similar situation, but in many places, nature would be destroyed until the European mechanisms will work. And the conclusions for us to not to let this happen, what I think one should talk about is that the recovery of the nature, recovery of the peatlands is a good thing. But under Ukrainian conditions, we all clearly understand that resources, both human and financial, is not enough. And while understanding the whole importance of recovery, we have to concentrate on preservation of those territories that we have, natural and semi-natural. Even though that's a peat bog that is degraded, that is drying out, or say drained and is not fulfilling its ecological function. But if this peatland will be preserved in this way, in this state, and will be in the state of communal property in the future, it can be restored. But how can, if we give this peatland into private sector, and later on to recover this very peat bog will be much heavier and complicated to do than now. And again, we talked a lot about financial mechanisms. A very nice and important presentations we have seen today, but again, a very unpopular idea. For example, in Ukraine, the inhabitants, they have this kind of notion as dotations. What does it mean? It means that the communities who are there in some kind of location that are more poor, they receive dotations from the state budget, meaning that an inhabitant of Kyiv who is paying more taxes, he is paying by these taxes as the work of the school in one of the village communities. At the same time, the inhabitants of Kyiv are not asking whether they want to give out these dotations. At the same time, with the state policy of the land preservation and the land that belongs to community or to a state in this region, we have to ask and to pursue them to pay additionally to preserve this nature. That is why, if really under Ukrainian conditions where a huge amount of state and municipality property land are, we have to talk not only about the good things for and benefits for the landowners, but also on the land of state and communal property by means of law, by means of state mandatorship to preserve these territories. That's another example. Back in the 2023, one of the extraction sites, we had lots of articles about that. And let me tell what this means. What is marked here in black are the areas where the permits for amber extraction is given out. What is mentioned is grid are the borders of the natural reservation area where big project on the degraded peatland project is going. Hydrologically, it's the same swamp, but one part of them we are recovering it. Another part will be dried out for the extraction of amber. There is no logic in it, but unfortunately, that's Ukrainian reality now. A little bit more about how we try under these conditions to use the approaches for nature preservation. It seems to me that we still have them working, not always. And let me show you the example. First one, very much important, is that within the framework of the work on preservation of peatlands and nature as it is, this is a work on legislation level. We are analyzing all the projects of legislations, Cabinet of Ministers resolutions that can have anything to add with harming to the nature, and we are trying to combat them. On the other side, we are trying to constantly push forward and lobby some kind of legislational initiatives that will allow to preserve the nature. For example, last year, we managed that the framework climatic law, after the second discussion in the Ecology Committee of our parliament, has put a priority of the state climate policy, the nature-oriented solutions, meaning the preservation, restorement of different ecosystems. But by now, that's only the framework law, meaning that this is a declaration. And luckily, in 5 years, we will come to the practical implementation. Another one, we had the updated program in Ukrainian, it's called the development of mineral rare earth baseline, meaning that there's a program on the development of the new rare earth extraction sites. So now we put in the resources into peatlands. And at the same time, we have to emphasize that in Ukraine, institutionally, the Ministry of Environmental Protection is still weak. And so to say, if any kind of questions on the legislational level are not raised by civilian organizations, nobody is raising them, even the profile Ministry of Environment, unfortunately, even though they have a pretty big amount of specialists, but because of the limitations in the budget during the war times, they don't have enough amount of specialists. Another important moment of how we work is the combating with those who disobey the law on nature preservation. We have the practices when a big business without any permits can start to dig the meliorational channels, to extract the rare earths, to do some kind of illegal tree cutting in the swamp areas within the nature preservation area. in addition, meaning that in addition to the legislational work, we, as a matter of fact, have to combat even those perpetrators. These have to do with kind of document submission and so on. And it is not important. It is not like that you have to submit a document and that's it. No, you have to post in the Facebook, to do some kind of applications, to raise the campaign on awareness and so on. But when it comes to this, the law preservation prosecutor's office is working pretty good. One of them, together they managed to preserve some kind of land. Another what is important in Ukraine is, again, I see a lot of big harmful projects. And according to those projects, it is important to work with them at the very early stage. Why? For example, how is the selling of the permits in Ukraine for peat extraction is going? First, the State Service on Geology and Rare Earths writes down a letter to the Ministry of Environmental Protection asking, like, hey, can we extract peat bog here? Then the ministry is putting this land on the auction. The winner buys the money to the state, and then the procedure of the impact on the environment is happening. Everyone knows about that. But at the same time, by the time when this procedure goes, the money is already paid into state budget. And as a matter of fact, at this very stage, those notes that will be written down from NGOs and scientists, they will not be taken into account because the money is already paid. That is why after this scandal, we started to work with them at the very early stage. Every week we sign out and write the files to the ministry, we write down the comments. And at this time, more than 80 projects on extraction of peat and amber that would be harming the environment and precisely to the wetlands. So to say, they are as a very border with the nature preservation area or any kind of pristine places. We tried to prevent it due to our actions at the very early stage. Again, the practice shows that the creation of the national parks and nature preservation groups, that's one of the stories in Ukraine where one can ensure, I will not be doing a big pause on this, everyone understands this, as the pictures of where the national park is and where we are trying to preserve, and the ministry has already agreed upon the documents, and we work with those. And another interesting mechanism that we managed to launch in Ukraine recently is, so to say, I will be honest with you, the Polish colleagues helped us a lot from the foundation. I can't say this name correctly, but it's called Dzieszcze Przyrodnicze, with Radek Michalski, who back at the time told that Poland has this kind of mechanism of creation of the preservation areas. And we have launched this mechanism in Ukrainian legislation, and we did it a little bit more strict than in Poland, because in Poland it covers a small list of types. In our case, it is spread, covers all the red books that in Ukraine is pretty big. And in order to create the nature preservation area, you don't need to have the agreement with the landowner. You need a scientific fact that some kind of species is growing here, and this territory requires protection. So a couple of days ago, this picture was taken, and Catherine, who did the presentation, she's here. And that's Vologha Luvka territory, where we found the types of herbs that are there in the Red Book. And in this very moment, there is a procedure of providing the nature preservation status to this whole territory, not only to those areas where these herbs grow, but for the whole area. And this allows us to at least preserve this very area, even though that's in the perspective. Yes, we will do the wetting in here, but by now let it be the wetland, then some kind of arable lands, wet meadow. Another one is spatial planning. There are documents that are called Complex Plan on Spatial Development of the Communities. And each community has this kind of, to design this kind of documents. The deadline upon the documents was on the 1st of January 2025, but because of the war, it was postponed by the end of the martial law. And these plans were designed by USAID and funded by USAID and by some time. And right now they are mostly funded by the own money of the communities. And again, while coming back to what I told before, many of the communities are interested in the maximum exploitation of the nature resources. So why are these plans so important? Because as a matter of fact, this plan identifies for each land area within the community its functional usage, meaning that the area of the land, agricultural land for the growing of the agricultural cultures, the area for the forest recreation, the area for construction, and so on. And if within the framework of these plans, we, for the peatlands, either dried out that are used right now or the drained but are not used in the agriculture now, if these territories happen to be in the corresponding area, the chances to preserve them or to restore them will be next to zero. If these territories will be either in the functional areas for recreation, then we can talk about that, and then it's going to be much easier. And I want to say that, unfortunately, the importance of this ecology, Ukrainian ecology community doesn't understand it. What I mean by that is the ministry and regional administration. Even though I know that here we have people who work in the regional administrations in this regard, in this field. But us as a UNCG organization, we are trying to write down the comments to this plan to provide our proposals to keep in mind the preservation of the peatlands. But by now, unfortunately, for the 1.5 years of work, we cannot give you any kind of successful stories. We write this kind of files down, but they are ignoring us. Why? Because for the community, unfortunately, the reality is as such. For the majority of communities, it's better to give the land for the rent to the agriculture and receive land and receive money for the budget. And for the future, since there always pops up the question about from EU, how within the framework of the post-war recovery can we help you? Well, there is a couple of aspects. First one, I did not write it down in the presentation, but I would like to articulate this. It is very much important when European civilian organizations resort to their governments, their deputies in the European Parliament, and they address to Ukrainian governments. That's something that helps us a lot. For example, last year, we managed to stop the attempt of cancel the procedure of the estimation of the impact on the environment due to the tree cutting, due to our European colleagues. And what is also important, and again, it's only my opinion, I am pretty sure it will cause any kind of discussions, but I'm sure that within the framework of the limited resources, it's better to put money and to do the projects on the restoration of areas there that are still in the state or communal property, and not to allow to do any kind of harmful economic activity happening on them. Because for the harmful economic activity, we have a bunch of other territories that are so much degraded that on the contrary, we have to talk about conservation of land there. And what the practice also shows, unfortunately, not many people do in Ukraine this, but precisely the advocacy and legislational activities. There is a bunch of activities and examples where for a long time we do some kind of work with the communities, we protect something, but then all of a sudden a law changes and all this work went in vain. And I am the representative of the big NGO, but I still think that there are these kind of problems in Ukraine where we have a little amount of network of those organizations that are local and who within their region deal with economy problems. And not just tell about the idea and importance of preservation of the land, but are not afraid to combat the solutions of the local authorities who try to implement some kind of harmful project. For me, it has always been pleasant when I go to Poland, Polish colleagues go to me, that there are organizations not only in the big cities, but also in the smaller populated areas who efficiently work when it comes to nature preservation. And the development of this kind of organizations in Ukraine will also be beneficial. Thank you. By now, that's it from my side.
Well, thank you, Petro. And are there any questions? Maybe remarks? I think I will express the common thought of at least the Polish and Finnish organizations here that we are very much keen to support the Ukrainian conservation community, and we are looking for possibilities for the instruments and tools how to support our Ukrainian colleagues, and we are open to every kind of possible cooperation in this regard. So what you have mentioned during your presentation, we totally support this statement. So we stand with Ukraine. Who else wants to add anything? Maybe questions, maybe remarks? No. So thank you, Petro, and we are going to the very last point of our agenda, and we are terribly running out of time, but due to some technical issues, we apologize for, but due also to some vivid discussions and questions. So now the final point of today's conference, I would like to invite Jarek Krogulec, who is the conservation director of our organization, to make a short summary of today's meeting. Jarek, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Slava. It really will be a big problem for me to make a short summary of such an important meeting.
Well, you have to.
Yes, I have to. So at the beginning, I would like to thank to you and to Ola and to all organizers of this conference for very good conference, very interesting presentations you gathered. I mean, of course, it's due to the good partners. But yes, I am very delighted and happy to participate in this conference. But just to summarize, we just started from this first presentation of Victor, who focused on peatland restoration in Europe as a state of play and the aspect of national defense. And it's a big pity that we, after 20 or 30 years working with the peatlands, now should discuss about the defense, about the war, like our Ukrainian colleagues, and not work in the peaceful time. But okay, let's take it for granted now, and we should work with them. First of all, we learned and we just repeat that the peatlands are responsible for storing huge amount of carbon and also retaining water, which is the most important the service of peatlands. And a large amount was drained, so 50% of drainage was done for agriculture in Europe. And the worst countries like Netherlands, Denmark, and Poland it drained the most of the land. By the way, as we have the Scandinavian colleagues here, I learned that peatlands in Scandinavia, in fact, are better preserved, but less protected than in our Central Europe. And I remember when we have visited Karelia and met with Tero, there I was astonished that in fact that's true. I mean, a lot of the land was drained. I mean, you have this biggest network of ditches in Europe, and also the logging of a very, let's say, very weak forest is just proceeding. So destruction is everywhere, despite of the peaceful conditions and so on. So it means that we are very responsible and we are challenging to protect those which remained and work with local communities. So let's turn to Kaisu presentation, because you just pointed this, that the intensity of forest ditching in Finland in south sometimes reach 80 up to 100% of the land. So it's really, really huge. And then when we consider that 2023 was the Arctic hottest summer of record of the heat, it means that really we face a really big problem. So this is very important to work in conservation, and we are happy to learn that SnowChange already has 150 sites for the protection, and with the land concession and agreements, you can have over 50,000 hectares to work on. So really impressive areas and the coverage network. Anyway, I was especially impressed of the endangered landscape program project on this catchment in Kaitajoki, where you have filled the ditches and in this way protected the peatlands from further drought and loss of water. And what is the most important? The work with the local communities, which the knowledge of the local communities coupled with the scientific research give the best results. Then next was the presentation of Katerina about the economic incentives and ecological subsidies in Ukraine. This is big problems everywhere in whole Europe, in fact, in whole of the world. I understand that such economic incentives and ecological and subsidies can sometimes destroy the Amazonian forest, and of course we are closer to other areas, and these incentives in agriculture in Ukraine is especially harmful, because it can turn into a conversion of still pristine land or important habitats into arable land. As Ukraine is considered as a breadbasket of Europe, it is important to monitor this process and using the best practice from the other European countries, trying to limit at least and influence the government how to work with that. Then I was especially impressed of the work or presentation of Alexei about this spontaneous restoration of wetlands after the Kachovka Dam damage. This should be, of course, considered as the war crime, as an ecocide, as the first point. What was done there is well good in comparison with the Chernobyl catastrophe, which was, of course, extremely damaging first for the human beings, but also for the habitats and wildlife on the area. But from the other side, like Chernobyl, after many years, created the areas which is some kind of rewilding, spontaneous rewilding area. And exactly, I fully agree that this area which were flooded by Dnipro River after this disaster can be a best way to consider as rewilding areas and really fits to EU biodiversity strategy and the 30-30 target. So let's follow this case. Of course, it's very dangerous to work there because it's on the edge of the warfare and also full of Russian explosives there. But this is one area which can in future considered as one of the most the best case of spontaneous rewilding. Then we have lunch, and after that we focus on economy. So Paweł Pawlaczyk tried to find how cost and profits of wetland protection can stimulate wetland rewetting and how we can find the money for rewetting of wetlands and wetland protection. Discuss the carbon credits, which can be one of the solutions, but very often use not very safe assumptions. And also try to calculate economic values of wetlands, like through some tangible measures like water retention or carbon sequestration, which totally give us the some numbers of euros. As I propose, we should, of course, add also the biodiversity, but it is not easy to assess, so we should work for that for future. And then Katarzyna Zagórska also show how we can reward farmers for providing public goods to help wetland restoration. It is a very difficult task within current subsidies, which are not very effective, at least in Poland, and not attractive now. We should look for a better solution and to work with the Ministry of Agriculture and the institutes of which work with the economy to provide the better incentives for farmers to work with public goods. Tiina Oinonen present us a web atlas for peatland restoration, which was prepared within this particular project. And it's a good tool for illustrating our effort, starting from Finland to Poland and Ukraine. It will grow, I understand, and the partners will fill this atlas with the information, with the illustration of our work, and it will stimulate the conservation and restoration work within our countries and wider Europe. And last but not least is this Petro presentation about wetlands and peatlands in special planning and threats which comes from warfare and post-war development. This is very difficult and very important work you are running because the pressure from the war we feel in Poland, we feel due to damaging the habitats along the border in Poland with Belarus, with Russia, but also further north. The same is with Lithuania, Latvia, and possibly Finland as well. But of course, it's nothing to compare with the pressure which is in Ukraine. And I think the best is just to unite your organizations with organizations of within Europe. I don't know what is the best. What I can suggest, maybe the Wetland International is, I don't know, you are already in this group with Wetland International, because we are, as OTOP, we are BirdLife Poland, and BirdLife International is has already partner in Ukraine, but working with other countries using the best practice and also, of course, better examples from other countries as some warning signal is probably one of the solution. You mentioned, Petro, that you have a lot of world preserved areas which have no official protected status. I know it from Poland from 90s, and probably one of the solution, of course, it's not easy to say, is just to provide some kind of shadow list. So list of such or database of such areas which can provide you can provide for government when necessary, when you will have opportunity to show that those sites are has very high biodiversity value. It should be protected and has let's say value on the level of the country, on the level of Europe, or sometimes probably even the global importance. But it's in Poland, sorry, in BirdLife, we use important bird areas, which is focused on birds, but of course, for using the data from, for example, Habitat Directive or Berne Convention, you can propose as some shadow list of such sites. And of course, important is one of the most important is work within the country to associate with other NGOs in the countries. I remember Poland in 1990s or 2000, early 2000, Paweł Pawlaczyk and Victor can probably add some words to that. That at the beginning we have very often conflicts with others. We sometimes were competing with others, and after many years, we find our ecological niche, and now we work in coalitions. We are in coalition with Klub Przyrodników. We are in coalition with Wetland Center. We, for example, are now in coalition, so-called K10 coalition with Dziedzictwo Przyrodnicze, so Natural Heritage with Radek Michalski. And we work together in Carpathian projects. And this Carpathian project is run by Frankfurt Zoological Society, represented here on this conference by Viktor Fenchuk, who work also in Ukraine. So maybe, and also in Rivne region, in Rivne Reserve. So let's consider to join forces with Frankfurt Zoological Society in this part of the work. And of course, zonal protection, what was we learned once in early 90s from our Scandinavian colleagues. It was then developed by Eagle Protection Committee for protection of the rare eagles, but then of course can be also included, implemented to other species of habitats like you have done. So it is very good example how exchange of best practice and knowledge international works for. So anyway, thank you very much for all your presentation, for very important meeting, and let's this project effects on even stronger cooperation between Poland, Ukraine, Scandinavia, and other countries as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jarek. Thank you very much for providing this brilliant and comprehensive summary of today's meeting. I would like to say thank you to our excellent speakers and for those who made it possible by providing some technical aid. Sorry again for some issues. We are still learning how to deal with it. Thank you for our interpreters for their professional assistance, and thank you for all the attendees, all the participants for your brilliant questions, for your vivid discussions and notes. Please, let's try to keep in touch. Let's try to network with each other and build this global conservationist empire which Jarek proposed to build. So thank you very much indeed, and see you soon.